In Seoul's most exclusive private hospital, where the wealthy purchase discretion as readily as treatment, a small girl sits in silence that terrifies her father more than any enemy ever has. Seo Joon-ho has built an empire where information is currency, where knowing someone's weakness before they know yours means survival. But he's just discovered his daughter's weakness, and in his world, weaknesses don't stay hidden for long. Across the city, Maya Reynolds is closing her clinic for the day, unaware that in an hour, two men will walk through her door and offer her more money than she's seen in 3 years, to treat a patient she'll never be allowed to speak about, in a place that doesn't officially exist. If you value the hard work behind these stories, hitting that subscribe button would mean so much to me. Also, before we begin, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Now let's continue. The black sedan arrived at 6:47 p.m., precisely as the last child was leaving Maya's clinic. She noticed it immediately, not because of the expensive paint job or the tinted windows, but because of the way it sat at the curb, engine running, occupying space with the quiet arrogance of people who've never been told no. Maya Reynolds had developed a sixth sense for danger during her 3 years in Seoul, a city that had welcomed her with the suspicious hospitality reserved for outsiders who didn't fit neat categories. Black American, a woman working alone, she'd learned to read the subtle shifts in atmosphere that preceded trouble. This car, with its perfect stillness in the middle of the evening rush, radiated the kind of danger that came with money and power. She locked the clinic door, deliberately turning her back to the vehicle, fishing for her keys with hands that wanted to shake but wouldn't. Behind her, she heard car doors opening, 2 of them, synchronized with military precision. Footsteps approached, expensive leather against concrete, the kind of shoes that cost more than her monthly rent. "Ms. Reynolds." The voice was polite, accented, completely devoid of warmth. "We apologize for the intrusion. Our employer requires your expertise on a confidential matter." Maya turned slowly. 2 men in tailored suits, early 30s, with the kind of physical presence that suggested they were more than assistants. Their faces were professionally blank, but their eyes were doing calculations, scanning her, the street, the windows of the surrounding buildings. Looking for witnesses. Looking for complications. "I don't make house calls," Maya said, keeping her voice steady. "You can schedule an appointment through my website." The taller one, the one who hadn't spoken, allowed himself the smallest smile. Not humor. Recognition. He'd expected resistance, was perhaps even relieved by it. In his world, people who folded too quickly were usually hiding something. "The child is 8 years old," the first man said, pulling a manila envelope from his jacket. "The diagnosis was confirmed 2 weeks ago. Profound sensorineural hearing loss, bilateral. The family is private about such matters. They require someone with expertise in pediatric audiology and speech therapy, someone who can work within their home, someone who understands discretion." He emphasized that last word carefully, and Maya understood its weight. Discretion in this context didn't mean patient confidentiality. It meant something far more absolute. "I work with families in my clinic," Maya said, not touching the envelope. "I don't do private consultations. I'm sure you can find." "The compensation is 200 million won," the man interrupted. "For a 3-month commitment. The child needs intensive therapy. You'll be provided accommodation on the estate, all expenses covered. If you perform satisfactorily, there will be additional opportunities." Maya's breath caught. 200 million won. Nearly $160,000. That was 3 years of income, maybe 4. That was enough to pay off every debt she'd fled from, enough to finally stop running from the bill collectors who'd hounded her after Julian's death, enough to send money back to her mother, who was too proud to ask but desperately needed it. It was also clearly the kind of offer that came with strings attached. Strings that looked like steel cables. "What's the catch?" Maya asked quietly. The taller man's smile widened fractionally. "Your complete discretion. The family's identity, the child's condition, the location of the residence, all of this remains confidential. Forever. Non-negotiable. And if I refuse, then you refuse." The first man tucked the envelope back into his jacket. "We'll find someone else." "But Ms. Reynolds." He paused, and for the first time, something human flickered in his expression. "The child is suffering. Her father doesn't. He doesn't understand what she needs. You have a reputation for being exceptional with difficult cases. We've been watching your work for 2 months. You're patient. You listen. You see children as people, not problems to be fixed. Something in his tone made Maya look at him more carefully. Beneath the professional facade, she saw genuine concern. Whoever this child was, these men cared about her welfare. That realization didn't make the situation less dangerous, but it did make it more complicated. "I need 24 hours to think about it," Maya said finally. "You have 12, the man replied, handing her a business card with nothing but a phone number printed on it. "Call before 7 a.m. We'll send a car." They were back in the sedan and gone before Maya could formulate another response, disappearing into Seoul's evening traffic with the practiced ease of people who were never really there. Maya didn't sleep that night. She sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea going cold between her hands, staring at the card, thinking about Julian. Her son would have been 12 now if he'd lived. He would have been starting middle school, probably driving her crazy with his questions about everything, filling their apartment with the chaos and noise and beautiful mess of a child becoming a person. Instead, he was 4 years dead, buried in Detroit in a grave she couldn't afford to visit. Dead because she'd trusted a system that promised to help them, that swore the experimental treatment would save him, that needed just one more signature, just one more consent form, just one more chance to try something new on a little black boy whose life, apparently, was worth the risk. She'd signed everything, believed everything. And when Julian died, not from his illness, but from complications from the treatment, the hospital had offered its deepest condolences and a settlement that barely covered the funeral costs if she agreed never to speak about what happened. She'd taken the money because she needed to bury her son, and then she'd fled. First to California, then to Seattle, and finally to Seoul, where nobody knew her story, where she could disappear into anonymity and rebuild something resembling a life. But running hadn't healed her. Every child she treated carried echoes of Julian, his laugh, his stubbornness, his fierce determination to understand the world even when it confused him. She'd chosen to work with deaf and hard-of-hearing children specifically because communication had been Julian's gift. He'd been so good at making himself understood, at finding ways to connect even when words failed him during the worst of his illness. Now someone was offering her more money than she'd ever seen to help another child, another family desperate for solutions. And every instinct she'd developed said this was dangerous, that taking this job meant entering a world she didn't understand and couldn't control. But the man's words kept echoing. The child is suffering. Her father doesn't understand what she needs. Maya had spent 3 years keeping her distance, maintaining professional boundaries, never letting herself get too attached. She told herself it was self-preservation, that she couldn't survive losing another child. But the truth, the one she only acknowledged at 3 a.m. when sleep wouldn't come, was that she'd been slowly disappearing. Without Julian, without purpose beyond simple survival, she'd become a ghost haunting her own life. At 6:47 a.m., precisely 12 hours after the sedan had arrived, Maya picked up her phone and dialed the number. "I'll come," she said when the line connected. "But I need something first." "Name it. If I determine that the child is being harmed, if the family's privacy is causing medical neglect, I walk away. No matter how much you've paid me. That's non-negotiable." There was a long pause. Then, "Understood. The car will arrive in 1 hour." The estate was 40 minutes outside Seoul, hidden behind walls that looked ancient but bristled with modern security. The gates opened silently as they approached, and Maya counted at least 6 cameras before they'd even entered the property. The driveway curved through gardens that were beautiful in that specific way that required armies of staff. Too perfect to be natural, too controlled to be peaceful. The house itself was a contradiction. Traditional Korean architecture wrapped around what was clearly a modern fortress. Graceful rooflines concealed security measures. Peaceful courtyards contained armed guards trying to look decorative. Beauty weaponized into protection. Inside, the contradiction intensified. Priceless art on walls that were almost certainly reinforced. Silk screens covering bulletproof glass. Wealth displayed with the confidence of people who'd never been told they couldn't have something. Maya was led through corridors that smelled of wood polish and underlying tension. Staff members moved through the space with practiced invisibility, never making eye contact, never acknowledging her presence beyond stepping aside to let her pass. Fear had a smell in this house, subtle as expensive perfume, but just as pervasive. Finally, they reached a door at the end of a quiet hallway. One of her escorts knocked twice, paused, then opened it. The room beyond was unexpectedly gentle. Soft light filtered through translucent curtains. Toys arranged neatly on shelves, more decorative than used. A small desk with textbooks stacked precisely. And by the window, a figure so still she might have been painted into the scene. The girl, Hana, though Maya didn't know her name yet, was smaller than Maya expected for 8 years old. Delicate features, long black hair braided with a precision that suggested someone else's hands. She wore a simple white dress and sat with her back straight, hands folded in her lap, staring out at gardens she couldn't enjoy because she'd been confined to this room. Maya's professional assessment began automatically. Posture indicating tension, lack of spontaneous movement suggesting depression or trauma, environment too controlled for a child this age. But beneath the clinical observations, she felt something more visceral, recognition. This was what isolation looked like when it wore expensive clothes and lived in beautiful prisons. "Hana," Maya said softly, knowing the child couldn't hear but needing to fill the silence anyway. She moved slowly into the girl's line of sight, knelt down so they were eye level, and waited. For a long moment, Hana didn't react. Then slowly, her gaze shifted. Their eyes met, and Maya saw something that made her breath catch: intelligence, wariness, and a loneliness so profound it was almost physical. Maya smiled gently and signed, "Hello. My name is Maya." Hana's eyes widened fractionally. She glanced toward the door, where the escorts had remained, then back to Maya. Her hands moved slightly, aborted halfway through a gesture, then stilled. "It's okay," Maya signed. "I'm here to learn your language. Will you teach me?" Before Hana could respond, the air in the room changed. Maya felt it before she heard the footsteps. The way the escorts straightened, the way even the light seemed to dim slightly. Power entering a space. Seo Joon-ho didn't walk into the room so much as displace the atmosphere. He was younger than Maya expected, early 40s perhaps, with the kind of presence that made you understand immediately why people feared him. Expensive suit, perfect posture, and eyes that calculated value in microseconds. He looked at Hana without seeing her, looked at Maya and saw everything, looked at his men, and they immediately retreated, closing the door behind them. "Ms. Reynolds." His English was perfect, barely accented. "Thank you for coming. I trust my associates explained the situation. They mentioned a child needing therapy," Maya said carefully, standing but not backing away. "They didn't mention a prisoner." His expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "My daughter is not a prisoner. She is protected." From what? From a world that would destroy her if they knew her weakness. Maya glanced at Hana, who had gone completely still, her earlier spark of engagement extinguished. "She's deaf, Mr. Seo. That's not a weakness. That's a difference. In my world, Ms. Reynolds, difference is weakness. Weakness is death." He moved to the window, looking out at his fortress kingdom. "I need you to fix her. Discreetly. Completely. Make her normal again, and you'll be compensated beyond your contract." The words landed like stones in still water, rippling outward with implications that made Maya's stomach turn. This wasn't about helping a child adapt. This was about erasure. About forcing a square peg into a round hole until the peg broke or the hole did. "I can't fix her," Maya said quietly. "Because she's not broken." Joon-ho turned, and for the first time, she saw his full attention directed at her. It was like standing in front of a firing squad. "I've paid you 200 million won to provide therapy," Maya interrupted, her heart hammering but her voice steady. "Not to perform miracles. Your daughter is profoundly deaf. No amount of money or therapy will give her hearing. But what I can do is teach her to thrive. I can give her language, communication, connection. I can help her understand that she's not broken, that her silence holds as much value as anyone's voice. And," she took a breath, knowing this was the line that couldn't be uncrossed, "I can teach you the same thing." The silence stretched so long Maya wondered if she'd just signed her own death warrant. Joon-ho's face was carved from stone, revealing nothing. Behind her, she could hear Hana's breathing, quick and shallow. Then, impossibly, Joon-ho smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "You're either very brave or very foolish, Ms. Reynolds." "I'm a mother who lost her son," Maya said. "I don't have the luxury of being foolish anymore. So yes, I'm brave. Because that little girl behind me deserves better than shame and hiding. And if you can't see that, then you've already lost her. Not to deafness. To fear." For a moment, something human crossed Joon-ho's face. Pain, perhaps, or recognition of truth he'd been avoiding. Then the mask returned. 3 months, he said. "You have 3 months to show me I'm wrong." "But Ms. Reynolds," he moved toward the door, paused. In this house you see nothing, hear nothing, and speak nothing beyond your work with Hana. People who forget that rule don't forget anything else. Do you understand? Yes. He left without looking at his daughter again, the door closing with a finality that made the room feel smaller. Maya turned back to Hana, who was watching her with something new in her expression. Hope, fragile and terrified. The girl's hands moved slowly, deliberately. Are you really staying? Maya knelt again, took those small hands in hers and signed. Yes. I'm staying. And we're going to teach your father something he's forgotten. That the strongest language is the one spoken without words. Outside, through bulletproof glass and reinforced walls, Seoul sprawled in the afternoon sun, oblivious to the quiet revolution beginning in this gilded cage. Two women, one who'd lost everything, one who'd never been allowed to have anything, were about to discover that healing doesn't always look like victory. Sometimes it looks like survival. Sometimes it looks like learning to say, I'm here, in a language that no one else understands, but means everything to the person who hears it. The truth neither of them knew yet was that the real danger wasn't Park Jin-woo's assassins or Joon-ho's empire. The real danger was that in saving Hana, Maya might finally have to forgive herself for all the ways she couldn't save Julian. And forgiveness, as any survivor knows, is often more terrifying than any threat a crime lord could make. Life doesn't ask our permission before changing us. It doesn't wait for us to be ready or willing or brave enough. Sometimes it just puts a choice in front of us. Risk everything for someone else's salvation, or protect ourselves and live with the guilt forever. Maya had spent 3 years choosing safety, choosing distance, choosing the slow death of isolation over the quick pain of connection. But standing in that room, watching Hana's hope war with her terror, she understood something that would reshape everything. Some children save us by letting us save them. Sometimes the only way to honor the dead is to fight like hell for the living. The first week at Seo Estate taught Maya more about power than any textbook ever could. Real power, she learned, wasn't loud. It didn't announce itself with guns or threats. Real power was in the way staff members stopped breathing when Joon-ho walked past, how conversations died mid-sentence when his shadow fell across a doorway, how even the air seemed to arrange itself around his presence. She'd been given rooms in the West Wing, a bedroom, bathroom, and small sitting area that were more luxurious than any apartment she'd ever rented. Everything was provided, clothes in her size that she hadn't requested, toiletries matching her usual brands, even books from her favorite authors. The message was clear: we know everything about you, and you know nothing about us. Surveillance was constant, but invisible. She never saw cameras, but she felt them. Conversations with Hana were the only moments of privacy, and that was only because Joon-ho had reluctantly agreed that therapy required confidentiality. Even then, Maya suspected someone was monitoring. If not listening, then watching. Hana's room became their sanctuary. Every morning at 8, Maya would arrive to find the girl already awake, already waiting by the window with that heartbreaking stillness that spoke of a child who'd learned that stillness equaled safety. The first 3 days, Hana barely engaged. She'd respond to direct questions signed clearly, but offered nothing spontaneous. Her signs were textbook perfect. Someone had already begun teaching her Korean Sign Language, but completely lifeless. On the 4th day, Maya changed tactics. She arrived with art supplies, high-quality paper, oil pastels in colors that seemed to glow, charcoal for depth, watercolors for experimentation. She spread everything on the floor, ignoring the pristine white rug that probably cost more than her first car, and began to draw. Hana watched from her perch by the window, curiosity warring with years of learned caution. Maya drew without explaining, let her hands speak the language of creation. She sketched Hana by the window, captured the way light caught in her hair, the elegant line of her spine, the terrible solitude of her posture. When she finished, she held it up for Hana to see. Not as a gift, but as a statement: I see you. Not the perfect daughter your father wants. You. The real you. Hana's breath caught. Her hands moved before she could stop them. That's me? That's you, Maya confirmed. I look sad. You are sad. The radical honesty made Hana blink. In this house where every surface gleamed with denial, where weakness was buried under beauty, someone had finally acknowledged truth. Slowly, impossibly, the girl climbed down from the window seat and approached the art supplies. Can I try? She signed. You can do anything you want, Maya replied. In this room, there are no rules except one: be honest. What emerged over the next hours was a revelation. Hana didn't draw pretty pictures. She drew her world, the cage of her room, the bars of her father's expectations, the silence that wasn't peaceful but suffocating. She used blacks and grays almost exclusively, except for one splash of color. A small figure in the corner of each drawing, always watching, always separate. Herself, Maya realized. The only bright thing in a monochrome prison. "Tell me about this," Maya signed, pointing to a particularly stark image. A house made of shadows with windows like empty eyes. Hana's hands moved slowly, as if the signs were being pulled from deep within her. Before the silence, I could hear my father's voice. He was different then. He would read to me. Stories about princesses who saved themselves. Then one day someone hurt me. Bad men who wanted to hurt my father. They took me, and there was so much noise, guns and screaming, and my ears hurt so bad. When I woke up in the hospital, everything was quiet. And my father was quiet too, but different. Like he couldn't look at me anymore. Maya's throat tightened. The deafness wasn't congenital, she said aloud, forgetting for a moment that Hana couldn't hear her. She switched to sign. "You lost your hearing in the kidnapping?" "The doctors say my brain was hurt by the noise, by the fear. That sometimes trauma breaks things inside us that medicine can't see. Psychogenic hearing loss, possibly compounded by acoustic trauma." Maya had read about it, but never treated it. Cases where psychological trauma manifested as physical disability. The mind protecting itself by shutting down pathways to pain, except in this case, it had shut down sound itself. "Does your father know?" Maya signed. "He knows I can't hear. He doesn't know it's because of him. Because I'm his daughter. Because loving me made me a target." Hana's hands trembled as she signed. "I think that's why he hides me now. Not because I'm deaf. Because I remind him that his world hurt his child, and he couldn't stop it." The sophistication of her insight was staggering. At 8 years old, Hana understood the complex psychology of guilt and shame that her father, at 40, couldn't face. She was living with the consequences of his denial, paying the price for his inability to process his own failure. "Hana," Maya signed carefully, "what happened to you wasn't your fault. It wasn't your father's fault, either really. It was the fault of bad people who made bad choices. But what I guess your father's fault is how he's treating you now. Hiding you away doesn't protect you. It just makes the loneliness worse." "I know," Hana signed, "but I'm tired of being angry about it. Being angry is exhausting when no one hears you." The statement hit Maya like physical force. How many times had she felt exactly that in the years after Julian died? Angry at the hospital, at the doctors, at the system, at God or fate or whatever cosmic force had decided her son wasn't worth saving. And how exhausting that anger had been, how it had consumed her until there was nothing left but ash and the compulsion to run. Then maybe, Maya signed slowly, we stop being angry at your father. And instead we teach him. Teach him what? That you're not the one who needs fixing. He is. The turning point came 3 weeks into Maya's tenure, on a Wednesday evening when Joon-ho made one of his rare appearances in Hana's room. He arrived unannounced, which Maya had learned was his style, keeping everyone off balance, maintaining control through unpredictability. Hana and Maya were in the middle of a lesson on emotional vocabulary. Maya had discovered that Hana had an enormous vocabulary for practical things, objects, actions, descriptions, but almost nothing for feelings. She could sign angry, but not frustrated. She could sign happy, but not content, or peaceful, or hopeful. Her emotional landscape had been flattened to the most basic primary colors. They were working on nuance when Joon-ho entered. Hana immediately stiffened, her expressive hands falling silent. Maya watched the transformation with clinical detachment that masked fury. This brilliant, emerging butterfly folding back into her cocoon the instant her father appeared. Joon-ho didn't look at Hana. He looked at Maya. Progress report. Hana is exceeding every milestone, Maya said, deliberately speaking aloud rather than signing, forcing him to engage in a language that excluded his daughter. Her receptive and expressive sign language skills are advanced for her age. She's beginning to develop abstract reasoning in ASL grammar. She's also demonstrating significant artistic talent. Can she speak? Joon-ho asked bluntly. No. Can she be taught? Not to any useful degree. Profoundly deaf individuals who lose hearing after language acquisition sometimes maintain vocal ability, but Hana's deafness is. Then what exactly am I paying you for? The question was cold, clinical. If she can't speak, can't function in normal society, what is the point of this therapy? Maya felt Hana flinch beside her, even though the girl couldn't hear the words. She could read the tone, the body language, the unmistakable message. You're still not enough. Something snapped in Maya. 3 years of professional boundaries, 3 weeks of careful diplomacy, a lifetime of choosing peace over conflict. All of it evaporated in the face of watching this man crush his daughter without even noticing. The point, Maya said, her voice dangerously soft, is that your daughter is a human being, not a project. She's brilliant, creative, and emotionally intelligent beyond her years. She's also profoundly lonely because the one person whose love should be unconditional, you, treats her like a problem to be solved. The temperature in the room dropped. Joon-ho's face became the mask Maya had learned to fear. Perfectly blank, utterly controlled, the expression of a man deciding how to dispose of a threat. Watch your tone, Ms. Reynolds. No. Maya stood, placed herself between Joon-ho and Hana. You hired me for my expertise. My expertise tells me that your daughter doesn't need speech therapy. She needs a father. She needs someone to learn her language instead of forcing her to learn his. She needs. Continue. 7:10 p.m. She needs to function in the real world, Joon-ho interrupted. The world doesn't accommodate weakness. Then change the world. Maya's voice shook now, not with fear but with 3 years of suppressed grief finding an outlet. You have more power than anyone I've ever met. You control politicians, businesses, entire sectors of this city's economy. You can make people disappear with a phone call. And you're telling me you're helpless to create a space where your daughter can exist as herself? You're not powerless, Mr. Seo. You're a coward. The word hung in the air like a bomb. Staff members monitoring from wherever they monitored probably stopped breathing. Hana, who couldn't hear but could read the tension in every line of Maya's body, had tears streaming silently down her face. Joon-ho took one step forward, then another. He was close enough now that Maya could see the calculations in his eyes, the weighing of consequences. His hand moved to his jacket, and for one surreal moment, Maya wondered if she was about to die for calling a mafia boss a coward in his own house. Instead, he pulled out his phone and typed something, held it up for her to read. What do you suggest? Maya exhaled shakily. Learn sign language. Not for meetings or negotiations or professional use. Learn it so you can talk to your daughter. Learn it because right now, every time you walk into this room, she stops breathing. She stops being herself. She becomes whatever ghost you want her to be, and it's killing her. I don't have time for. Make time. Maya's voice was steady now, certain. You found time to build an empire. You found time to wage wars and broker deals and become the most feared man in Seoul. Find 30 minutes a day to learn your daughter's language. Or don't, and spend the rest of your life wondering why she never looks at you with anything but fear and sadness. Joon-ho's jaw tightened. He looked past Maya for the first time, actually looked at Hana. The girl met his gaze, and Maya saw something pass between them. A moment of recognition, perhaps, or mutual devastation at how far apart they'd drifted. 30 minutes, Joon-ho said finally. Every evening. You'll teach us both. Us. Maya echoed. If she must live in silence, I'll learn to speak it. But Ms. Reynolds, he moved toward the door, paused. If you ever call me a coward again, you'll discover exactly what kind of man I am. Are we clear? Perfectly. He left, and the door closing sounded like an ending and a beginning simultaneously. Maya turned to find Hana staring at her with an expression that combined terror and awe, and something that might have been hope. The girl's hands moved slowly. Is he really going to learn? I think so, Maya signed back. Sometimes people need to be shocked into seeing what's right in front of them. Will it change anything? That was the question, wasn't it? Could a man who'd spent decades building walls learn to tear them down? Could a father who'd hidden his daughter away for fear of her weakness learn to see her strength? Could you teach someone to unlearn shame? I don't know, Maya signed honestly. But we're going to try. And Hana, she waited until the girl was looking directly at her. Even if he never changes, even if he stays exactly who he is right now, you are not responsible for his choices. You are enough, exactly as you are. Do you understand me? Hana nodded, but her hands said what her face couldn't. I want to believe you. I'm just so tired of disappointing him. Then stop trying to be what he wants, Maya signed, and start being who you are. Let him catch up. Let him do the work for once. That night, Maya lay awake in her luxurious prison, thinking about Julian. He'd been 6 when the doctors first said experimental treatment. 6 years old, and so brave, and so trusting when she'd explained that the new medicine might make him feel sick for a while, but would help him get better. Except it hadn't. It had killed him, slowly and painfully, while she'd signed consent form after consent form, believing that medicine knew best, that the system wouldn't steer her wrong, that if she just trusted the experts, her son would survive. She'd been so angry afterward. Angry at the doctors for lying, at herself for believing them, at Julian for leaving her. The anger had been easier than the grief, easier than admitting she'd made the wrong choice, that her trust had killed her son as surely as the treatment had. But watching Hana begin to emerge from her shell, seeing the girl's tentative hope that maybe, possibly, her father might actually see her, Maya realized something she'd been avoiding for 3 years. Healing wasn't about forgiveness. It was about choosing, consciously and deliberately, to step into the next moment anyway. To show up even when showing up hurt. To risk connection even when you knew connection could shatter you. She'd lost Julian. That would never stop being true. But maybe, just maybe, she could help save Hana. Not from deafness, but from the far more insidious disability of being taught that who you are is shameful. Outside, Seoul glittered in the darkness, millions of voices filling the night. In this fortress, in this room, Maya Reynolds was learning to hear the most important voices of all. The ones that spoke in silence, that signed truth in the spaces between words, that understood that the deepest connections aren't built on sound but on presence. Tomorrow, she'd begin teaching Seo Joon-ho the language of his daughter's world. Tomorrow, the real work would start, not fixing Hana, but breaking open the cage her father had built around both of them. Tomorrow, Maya would take the first steps toward understanding that some prisons are built from love twisted into fear, and that the key to those prisons isn't outside. It's inside. It always has been. In this world, we're taught that strength means never showing weakness, never admitting need, never asking for help. We build fortresses around our hearts and call it protection. But real strength, the kind that actually changes lives, looks different. It looks like a man learning to say, "I'm sorry," in a language he doesn't speak. It looks like a woman choosing to care when caring has destroyed her before. It looks like a child deciding that her father's shame doesn't define her worth. These are the revolutions that matter, not the loud ones, but the quiet surrenders that happen in locked rooms where no one is watching, where we finally admit that we're all just broken people trying to love each other better. The lessons began the following evening at precisely 7 p.m., which Maya learned was the only hour Seo Joon-ho consistently kept free. He arrived in Hana's room still wearing his suit jacket, tie perfectly knotted, every inch the impenetrable fortress he'd spent decades constructing. Hana sat at her small desk, hands folded, breathing shallow. The air felt explosive. Maya had prepared meticulously. She'd arranged 3 chairs in a triangle, set out materials, flashcards with basic signs, a mirror for visual feedback, paper for notes. Everything positioned to force proximity, to break down the careful distance Joon-ho maintained from his daughter. "We'll start simple," Maya said, speaking aloud for Joon-ho's benefit while simultaneously signing for Hana. Family signs. Father. Daughter. Love. Joon-ho's expression flickered, something that might have been discomfort. "I don't see how vocabulary about emotions is practical." "Then you fundamentally misunderstand what communication is for," Maya replied evenly. She demonstrated the sign for father. Hand in a specific configuration moving near the forehead. "This is how Hana says your name when she talks about you. Watch." She turned to Hana, signed, "Tell your father what you did today." Hana's hands remained frozen in her lap. Her eyes darted between Maya and Joon-ho, deer-like, terrified. When she finally signed, her movements were tiny, compressed. "I drew pictures. I studied mathematics. I ate lunch." The mechanical recitation of facts without feeling. Maya had expected this. Hana protecting herself by offering nothing vulnerable, nothing real. "Now watch this," Maya said to Joon-ho. She signed to Hana. "Tell me how you felt today." "The truth." Hana's breath caught. Her hands lifted, trembled, then moved with sudden fierce energy. "I felt trapped. I felt invisible. I felt like a ghost in my own life. I wanted to scream, but there's no point because no one hears ghosts." The signs were beautiful and devastating. Full body language that used space and expression and movement to convey what words alone couldn't capture. This was communication as art, as survival, as truth spoken by someone who'd been silenced too long. Joon-ho stared at his daughter. For the first time since Maya had arrived, she saw his mask crack. Not much, just a hairline fracture around his eyes, but enough to reveal the man beneath the monster. He looked gutted. What did she say? His voice was barely audible. Maya translated, word for word, watching him absorb each one like a blow. When she finished, silence stretched between them. Father and daughter separated by 3 feet and an ocean of unspoken pain. I didn't know, Joon-ho said finally. You didn't ask, Maya replied quietly. Asking requires being willing to hear the answer. Are you willing now? He looked at her, and she saw the calculation happening, cost-benefit analysis, risk assessment, the eternal question of powerful men. How much vulnerability can I afford? Then he looked back at Hana, really looked at her, and something shifted. Teach me, he said. Teach me to ask. Over the next 2 weeks, Maya watched a transformation that defied everything she'd believed about human nature. Joon-ho approached sign language the way he approached everything, with intense focus and ruthless efficiency. He practiced during phone calls, forming signs with one hand while his other held the phone. He studied videos during car rides. He installed signing apps on every device he owned. But knowledge wasn't connection, and Maya had to constantly redirect his attention from vocabulary acquisition to actual communication. He wanted to master the language. Maya needed him to master the vulnerability. Stop, she said one evening, 6 days into their lessons. Joon-ho had been drilling through advanced grammar while Hana sat watching, her expression unreadable. This isn't about perfection. Sign something wrong. Ask Hana a question and mess it up completely. I don't make mistakes deliberately, Joon-ho said stiffly. Then you'll never actually talk to your daughter. Communication isn't about being right. It's about being willing to be wrong and trying anyway. Maya turned to Hana. Your father wants to ask you something, but he's afraid he'll sign it incorrectly. What would you say to him? Hana's hands moved slowly, her signs directed at her father for the first time. I won't judge you for mistakes. I just want you to try. Translate, Joon-ho demanded. No, Maya said. You know enough signs to understand most of that. Figure it out. Ask her to repeat if you need to. Engage with her like a person, not a problem to be solved. The look he gave Maya could have frozen fire, but he turned to Hana and signed, clumsily but earnestly. Say again? Slow. Hana's eyes widened. Then, impossibly, she smiled, the first genuine smile Maya had seen from her. She repeated the signs, slower, adding facial expressions to clarify meaning. Joon-ho watched intently, and when understanding dawned, his own hands moved in response. What he signed was grammatically incorrect and spatially awkward, but the meaning was clear. I am trying. For you. Hana's face crumpled. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she signed back. I know. Thank you. Father and daughter stared at each other across 3 feet of space that suddenly felt crossable. Neither moved to close the distance, but something fundamental had shifted, acknowledgement perhaps. The beginning of seeing each other as actual people rather than as failures or disappointments. Maya felt her own throat tighten. This was what she'd come here for, what she'd risked everything to facilitate. 2 people learning to speak the same language, learning that love doesn't require sound, only presence. That night, she should have felt triumphant. Instead, she felt terrified, because the other truth Maya had been avoiding was becoming impossible to ignore. The better Hana got, the more visible she became within the household. Staff members who'd previously avoided her room now lingered nearby, watching. Guards discussed her progress in hushed tones. And somewhere in Seoul's criminal underground, people were noticing that Seo Joon-ho had gone soft, was spending hours every day learning a language that had no value in his world of violence and power. Weakness in this world drew predators. Maya had been at the estate for 5 weeks when she noticed the first sign that something was wrong. It was small, a new guard she didn't recognize, positioned where he could observe Hana's windows. When she mentioned it casually to her usual escort, his face went carefully blank. Increased security, he said. Routine. Nothing in this house was routine. She didn't mention it to Joon-ho. Their lessons had become fragile things, and she didn't want to shatter the trust they were building. But she started paying closer attention. More guards, more cameras, more locked doors between Hana's wing and the rest of the estate. Protection protocols intensifying. Someone was preparing for an attack. The realization hit her during a lesson one evening when Joon-ho arrived 15 minutes late, his knuckles bruised and his jacket missing. He'd cleaned up, changed shirts, but Maya had spent 3 years reading trauma on children's faces. She recognized violence's aftermath when she saw it. What happened? She asked. Nothing that concerns you. He moved to his usual chair, winced slightly. Ribs, Maya diagnosed automatically. Bruised, possibly cracked. If it affects Hana's safety, it concerns me. Hana, who'd been watching their exchange with growing anxiety, signed. Father, are you hurt? Joon-ho's hands moved in response before he seemed to realize what he was doing. Signing had become automatic for him in this room. Small problem. Handled now. Nothing for you to worry about. The ease of his signing was remarkable, but the content made Maya's stomach drop. In Joon-ho's world, small problems required violence. Handled meant someone had paid a price. And nothing to worry about was always a lie. Mr. Seo, Maya said carefully, if there's a threat to this household, I need to know. I can't protect Hana if I don't understand what we're protecting her from. He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw him weighing options. Finally, Park Jin-woo has learned about Hana's condition. He's spreading rumors that I'm weak, that my daughter's disability proves I'm unfit to lead, that anyone who follows a man who can't even protect his own child is a fool. He's using her deafness as a weapon against me. The casual cruelty of it stole Maya's breath. That's insane. That's reality. Joon-ho's voice was flat. Perception is everything in my world. If I'm perceived as weak, I become weak. If I become weak, people die. Starting with Hana. So what's the solution? Hide her forever? Pretend she doesn't exist. If necessary. No. Maya stood abruptly. Absolutely not. You've spent the last 2 weeks learning to communicate with your daughter, learning to see her as whole and valuable. And now, the second there's pressure, you're ready to shove her back in the cage? That's not protection, that's cowardice. Careful, Ms. Reynolds. Or what? You'll fire me? Kill me? Do whatever it is you do to people who tell you the truth. Maya's voice shook with fury. Your daughter is watching this conversation. She can't hear it, but she can see you. See us. And right now, you're teaching her that the moment loving her becomes inconvenient, you'll choose your empire over her. Is that the lesson you want her to learn? Joon-ho's face was stone, but his hands betrayed him. They'd curled into fists so tight his knuckles were white, and Maya realized with sudden clarity. He was terrified. Not of Park Jin-woo or rival syndicates or losing power. He was terrified of failing his daughter again, of being unable to protect her, of watching her suffer because of who he was. Hana stood slowly from her chair and crossed the space between them. She was so small, so fragile-looking, but when she placed her hand on her father's arm, there was nothing weak about the gesture. She signed, her movements fierce and clear. I would rather die as myself than live as your secret. If being deaf makes your enemies think you're weak, let them think it. Let them underestimate you because you love me. Then prove them wrong by destroying them while holding my hand. The sophistication of her strategic thinking, the absolute fearlessness in the face of danger. Maya saw where she'd gotten it. Hana was her father's daughter, just not in the ways he'd expected. Joon-ho stared at Hana like he was seeing her for the first time. Then slowly, impossibly, he sank to his knees, put himself at eye level with his 8-year-old daughter. When he signed, his hands were shaking. I have been so afraid of losing you that I forgot to let you live. I am sorry. I am so sorry. Hana's composure shattered. She threw her arms around her father's neck and sobbed silently against his shoulder while he held her. Awkwardly at first, then tighter, like he was trying to memorize the weight of her in his arms. Maya turned away, giving them privacy, her own eyes burning. This was the moment she'd been working toward, the breakthrough that might actually save this family. But even as relief flooded through her, a darker knowledge settled in her chest. Park Jin-woo wouldn't stop. Men like him didn't stop until they'd taken everything. And Joon-ho choosing to love his daughter openly, refusing to hide her anymore. That made her an even bigger target. The war was coming. And when it arrived, Maya would have to decide. How far was she willing to go to protect a child who wasn't hers? How much of herself was she willing to sacrifice for someone else's salvation? She'd spent 3 years running from that exact question. Running from the guilt of Julian's death, from the responsibility of caring when caring had destroyed her. But standing in this room, watching a broken family begin to heal, Maya understood something that changed everything. Some fights you don't get to choose. Some children claim you, and once they do, you're theirs, whether you want to be or not. Hana had claimed her the moment their eyes first met, the moment that silent, suffering child had recognized someone who saw her as whole. Running was no longer an option, which meant Maya had to prepare for what was coming, had to learn the rules of this violent world quickly enough to survive it. because the truth she'd been avoiding settled over her with absolute certainty. Before this was over, someone was going to die. The only question was who, and whether Maya could live with the answer. The shift in the household was immediate and undeniable. Joon-ho stopped hiding Hana. He didn't parade her through his organization. He wasn't reckless, but he stopped treating her existence like a shameful secret. Staff members were informed that Hana was deaf, and that sign language would be incorporated into household operations. Guards were taught basic signs for emergencies. The cook learned to ask Hana directly what she wanted for meals instead of going through intermediaries. Most radically, Joon-ho began taking Hana to breakfast with him, a daily ritual in the estate's formal dining room where he'd previously eaten alone, reading reports and taking calls. Now, every morning at 7 a.m., father and daughter sat across from each other in that cavernous space and signed about nothing in particular. The weather, Hana's studies, a book she was reading. Small talk that was revolutionary precisely because it was ordinary. Maya watched these transformations with equal parts pride and dread. Joon-ho was keeping his promise, learning to be Hana's father instead of her warden. But every step toward normalcy was also a step toward visibility, and visibility in this world meant vulnerability. The attack started small. A brick through one of the estate's outer windows with a note attached. The deaf leading the blind. Graffiti on the outer walls, crude and vicious, using Hana's disability as shorthand for weakness. Dead flowers delivered to the gate with condolence cards addressed to the Seo family's future. Psychological warfare, designed to remind Joon-ho that the world was watching, judging, finding him wanting. He handled each incident with cold efficiency. Increased patrols, enhanced security measures, quiet investigations into who was responsible. But Maya saw the toll it took. The way his jaw tightened when he thought no one was looking. The way he checked on Hana more frequently, as if reassuring himself she was still there, still safe. You can't protect her from everything, Maya said one evening after a particularly tense lesson. Hana had gone to bed, and they were alone in the sitting room adjacent to her bedroom. Joon-ho was standing by the window, staring out at gardens that had become a militarized zone. I can try. Trying isn't enough. You need a plan that doesn't involve locking her away forever. Maya moved closer, lowered her voice. What does Park Jin-woo actually want? My territory. My influence. My life, preferably. Joon-ho's laugh was bitter. He's wanted it for years, but I've always been too strong to challenge directly. Now he sees an opening. Because of Hana. Because I've shown that I care about something more than power. In our world, that's the ultimate weakness, having something you're not willing to lose. Maya thought about that, about the twisted logic that equated love with vulnerability. Then changed the narrative. Make Hana your strength instead of your weakness. He turned to look at her, genuinely curious. How? I don't know yet, Maya admitted. But there has to be a way. You've spent decades building an empire on the idea that strength means never showing vulnerability. What if you're wrong? What if real strength is about having something worth protecting and protecting it anyway, regardless of cost? That's a lovely philosophy, Ms. Reynolds. It's also a death sentence. Maybe. Or maybe it's the thing that makes your people actually loyal instead of just afraid. Fear works until someone scarier comes along. But loyalty, real loyalty, that lasts. Joon-ho studied her with an expression she couldn't read. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? Someone professional, detached. Someone who would do the job and leave without getting involved in matters that don't concern her. He paused. Instead, I got someone who calls me a coward to my face and lectures me about philosophy while my empire crumbles. Your empire isn't crumbling. It's evolving. There's a difference. Is there? He moved away from the window, sat heavily in one of the leather chairs. For the first time since she'd met him, he looked tired, not physically but existentially. Worn down by the weight of choices made long ago that he could never unmake. I built this life to protect my family. To make sure we'd never be vulnerable again, never be at anyone's mercy. My father died owing money to the wrong people. They came for everything, our home, our dignity, my mother's life. I was 16 when I decided I would never be powerless again. Every choice I've made since then has been about accumulating enough strength that no one could ever hurt the people I love. And instead, you created a world where loving people makes them targets, Maya said quietly. That's the trap, isn't it? The more power you accumulate, the more dangerous it becomes to care about anything. Yes. The simple honesty of it broke something open between them. For a moment, they weren't therapist and client, weren't hired help and crime lord. They were just two people who'd both learned that love could be weaponized, that caring could cost everything. My son died because I trusted the wrong people, Maya heard herself saying. Doctors who saw him as a research opportunity instead of a person. A system that valued data over life. I signed the consent forms because I believed they knew better than I did, that medicine was infallible, that if I just followed the rules and trusted the experts, everything would be okay. She wrapped her arms around herself. He died screaming, and I couldn't do anything except hold his hand and lie to him that it would stop hurting soon. Joon-ho said nothing, but his attention was absolute. After he died, I ran. Different cities, different countries, always moving because if I stayed still, the grief would catch up. I told myself I was building a new life, but really, I was just avoiding having a life at all. Then your men showed up and offered me a fortune to help another child. And I knew, it was dangerous. Knew getting involved with your family would cost me. But I couldn't say no because. She trailed off, surprised by the emotion clogging her throat. Because she reminded you of him, Joon-ho finished. No, because she reminded me of who I used to be before Julian died. Before I learned that loving people means risking everything. Hana still has that fierce certainty that she deserves to be seen and heard and valued, even when the world tells her otherwise. I couldn't let that be destroyed. I couldn't watch another child learn that their existence is shameful. They sat in silence, the confession hanging between them like a bridge. Outside, guards patrolled the perimeter with military precision. Inside, two damaged people were discovering that sometimes the only way forward is through grief, through fear, through all the ways they'd failed to protect the people they loved. I'm going to kill Park Jin-woo, Joon-ho said finally. It's the only way to end this. No. Maya's response was immediate and absolute. Violence is what got you here. More violence won't get you out. Then what do you suggest? That I negotiate? Compromise? Show mercy to a man who's using my daughter's disability to destroy everything I've built. I suggest you outthink him instead of outfighting him. You said perception is everything in your world. So change the perception. Make Hana visible in a way that makes her undeniable instead of vulnerable. You're talking in riddles. Maya stood, began pacing, her mind racing through possibilities. Park Jin-woo's whole strategy depends on people believing that Hana's deafness makes you weak. That having a disabled daughter means you're unfit to lead. What if you prove the opposite? What if you demonstrate that loving Hana, accommodating her needs, learning her language? What if all of that actually makes you stronger? How? A gathering. Here at the estate. Invite the heads of every organization you work with. Not a meeting, a dinner. A formal introduction of Hana to your world, on your terms. Show them that she exists, that she's brilliant and capable, that you're not ashamed of her. Make them see her as a person instead of a weakness. Joon-ho stared at her like she'd suggested. He set himself on fire. You want me to parade my 8-year-old deaf daughter in front of the most dangerous people in Seoul? People who would kill her without hesitation if they thought it would benefit them. I want you to stop hiding her like she's something to be ashamed of. Because as long as you treat her like a secret, Park Jin-woo can weaponize that shame. But if you own it, if you make her part of your public identity, he loses his leverage. Or he gains direct access to her. Ms. Reynolds, these aren't reasonable people. They're not going to be charmed by a child's smile and suddenly decide to leave us alone. No, but they might respect a man who's willing to be vulnerable in front of them. Might see that as a different kind of strength, the kind that doesn't need to hide anything because it has nothing to fear. That's insane. Probably, Maya agreed. But what's the alternative? Live in this fortress forever? Watch Hana grow up isolated and afraid while you fight an endless war against anyone who might use her against you? At some point, you have to decide what you're actually protecting. Her safety or your pride. The accusation landed hard. Joon-ho's face went very still, and Maya wondered if she'd finally pushed too far. If this was the moment he'd remember she was disposable and he was deadly. Instead, he laughed, short, sharp, humorless. You're either the bravest person I've ever met or the most foolish. Can't I be both? Apparently. He stood, moved toward the door, paused. I'll consider it. The gathering. But Ms. Reynolds, if I do this, if I put my daughter in front of these people, you need to understand what that means. You're not just her therapist anymore. You're complicit. You're part of this family, with everything that entails. Protection, yes, but also danger. Always danger. Can you live with that? Maya thought about Julian, about the 3 years she'd spent running from connection, about the choice she'd made the moment she'd decided to stay in this house. I'm already complicit, she said. I was complicit the second I taught Hana her first sign. You don't get to save people halfway. Either you're in, or you're out. I'm in. Then God help us both. He left, and Maya was alone with the weight of what she'd just proposed. A gathering of crime lords, gangsters, and people who'd built empires on violence. Hana, small and deaf and vulnerable, introduced to a world that would see her as prey. Every protective instinct Maya possessed was screaming that this was wrong, that she was putting a child in danger to prove a philosophical point. But the alternative was worse. The alternative was Hana spending her life in this gilded cage, never experiencing the world, never being seen as whole and valuable. The alternative was teaching her that her deafness was something to hide, that she was shameful, that existing openly was too dangerous. Maya had let the system hide Julian away, had let doctors and specialists convince her that she didn't know what was best for her own son. She deferred to expertise and authority, and it had killed him. She wouldn't make that mistake again. The next morning, Joon-ho announced the gathering. 3 weeks from Saturday. A formal dinner at the estate. Partners, allies, and careful enemies invited to meet the Seo family. All of it. No more secrets. No more shame. The household erupted into controlled chaos. Event planners were hired and sworn to secrecy. Security protocols were developed and redeveloped. Every inch of the estate was scrutinized for vulnerabilities. And at the center of it all was Hana, who understood what was happening, but not entirely why. Am I being punished? She signed to Maya one afternoon while they watched preparations happening around them. What? No. Why would you think that? Father is making me meet all these people. People who scare him. People who might hurt us. It feels like punishment for being deaf. Like he's saying, you wanted to be visible? Fine. Be visible and face the consequences. The interpretation gutted Maya. She pulled Hana close, signed emphatically, you are not being punished. This gathering is your father's way of saying he's not ashamed of you anymore. He's telling everyone who matters in his world that you exist, that you're important, that loving you is more important than their opinions. It's not punishment. It's protection. It doesn't feel protective. It feels scary. I know, and you're allowed to be scared. But Hana, Maya waited until the girl was looking directly at her. You're also allowed to be powerful. You've spent your whole life being taught that being deaf makes you weak. What if it doesn't? What if your silence is actually your strength? What if people underestimating you is the greatest advantage you could have? Hana's eyes widened. You think I could use it? My deafness? I think you already do. I think you see things other people miss because you're not distracted by sound. I think you read people better than anyone I've met because you've had to, because you can't rely on tone of voice, so you watch everything else. Facial expressions, body language, the small tells that hearing people ignore. You're already more observant than most adults. Imagine what happens when you stop apologizing for that and start using it deliberately. A slow smile spread across Hana's face, not happy exactly, but determined. Strategic. Her father's daughter, learning to weaponize the very thing meant to make her vulnerable. Teach me, she signed. Teach me how to read them. All of them. So when they come here thinking I'm weak, I can prove them wrong. And so, alongside sign language and emotional vocabulary and all the traditional therapeutic goals, Maya added a new curriculum, power. How to hold someone's gaze until they looked away first. How to stay perfectly still while everyone else fidgeted, making your calm the most dominant force in the room. How to smile in ways that made people uncomfortable because they couldn't tell if you were being friendly or assessing their weaknesses. She taught an 8-year-old girl the same skills she'd watched Joon-ho deploy. How to occupy space, how to make silence into pressure, how to let other people's assumptions become their blindness. It was possibly the most morally questionable therapy Maya had ever provided, and absolutely necessary for Hana's survival. Because the gathering was coming, and with it, the moment when everything they'd built would either solidify into something real or shatter into violence. Park Jin-woo sent his RSVP with a handwritten note, looking forward to meeting the family. All of it. The threat was clear. He was coming not to build bridges but to burn them, to find whatever weakness he could exploit and use it to destroy Joon-ho completely. Maya had suggested this gathering, had convinced Joon-ho to make his daughter visible, had promised it would work, that vulnerability could be strength. Now she had 3 weeks to make sure that promise didn't get them all killed. The night of the gathering arrived with the weight of inevitability. Maya had helped Hana dress in a traditional hanbok, deep blue silk embroidered with silver thread, elegant and age-appropriate, chosen specifically because it made Hana look both young and undeniable. The girl's hair was braided in a style that allowed her face to be fully visible, her expressions readable. No hiding. That was the entire point. Remember, Maya signed as they prepared to leave Hana's room, you don't have to perform for them. You don't have to be anything except exactly who you are. Your father loves you. She paused, surprised by the emotion catching in her throat. I love you. Nothing that happens tonight changes that. Hana's hands trembled slightly as she signed back. What if I mess up? What if I make father look weak? Impossible. You being yourself could never make your father look weak. It only makes him look human. And humans, real humans who love their children, are stronger than monsters who only care about power. You promise. Maya pulled the girl into a hug, held her tight. I promise. And Hana, if anything feels wrong tonight, if anyone makes you uncomfortable, you find me immediately. I don't care who they are or what they want. Your safety matters more than politics or business or any of it. Understood. Hana nodded against Maya's shoulder, then pulled back and signed with sudden fierceness. I trust you. You're the only person who's never lied to me about what I am. The statement cracked something in Maya's chest. She was about to respond when a knock interrupted. Joon-ho, entering without waiting for permission, which had become his way. He wore a traditional black hanbok, formal and severe, every inch the patriarch. But his eyes when he looked at Hana were soft. He signed, you look beautiful. Are you ready? As I'll ever be, Hana signed back. Then let's show them who we are. The dining hall had been transformed into something between a traditional Korean banquet and a theater of power. Low tables arranged in a U-shape, allowing everyone to see everyone else. Subtle but unmistakable security, guards positioned at every entrance, cameras hidden in the decorative elements, exits clearly marked. The message was explicit. You're welcomed here, but not trusted. Guests were already arriving when they entered. Maya stayed close to Hana, hyper-aware of every gaze that landed on the girl, every whispered conversation, every calculation happening behind professionally neutral faces. These were people who'd built empires on violence and strategy, and they were assessing whether Hana represented opportunity or threat. Park Jin-woo arrived fashionably late, making an entrance designed to remind everyone of his power. He was younger than Maya expected, late 40s, handsome in a way that was almost aggressive, with a smile that never reached his eyes. He moved through the room like he owned it, greeting allies and rivals with the same false warmth. When he reached Joon-ho, the temperature dropped. Seo, he said in Korean, which Maya understood well enough by now. Thank you for the invitation. I was surprised to receive it. Were you? Joon-ho's voice was mild, but his posture was pure threat. I thought it was time to be more transparent about my family, about what matters to me. Park's gaze slid to Hana, and Maya saw the calculation happening. He'd expected a child broken by disability, someone to pity or dismiss. Instead, he found Hana standing perfectly still beside her father, meeting his eyes with unsettling directness, her expression giving nothing away. This is your daughter, Park said, switching to clumsy English clearly meant to exclude Hana from the conversation. I heard she had difficulties. My daughter is deaf, Joon-ho replied in Korean, deliberately refusing to accommodate Park's linguistic manipulation. She uses sign language to communicate. Would you like to meet her properly? The challenge was unmistakable. Park's smile tightened. Of course. Joon-ho gestured Hana forward. She moved with the grace Maya had helped her develop. Slow, deliberate, making her presence felt rather than apologized for. When she was directly in front of Park, she signed, Good evening. Thank you for coming to our home. Maya translated aloud, her voice carrying just enough to be heard by nearby guests who'd stopped pretending not to eavesdrop. Park looked momentarily off balance, clearly unsure how to respond to a child who couldn't hear his condescension. Finally, he said, Tell her she looks very pretty. Tell him yourself, Joon-ho said quietly. She reads lips in Korean. Speak clearly and she'll understand you. The power dynamic shifted subtly. Park had tried to use Hana's deafness to exclude her from conversation, and Joon-ho had just demonstrated that exclusion went both ways. If Park wanted to communicate with Hana, he had to meet her on her terms. Park's jaw tightened, but he was too smart to let frustration show. He turned to Hana, spoke slowly and clearly. You look very pretty tonight. Hana watched his lips, then her hands moved in response. Thank you. You look expensive. Maya barely suppressed a laugh as she translated. The observation was perfectly childlike and perfectly cutting, noting the cost of Park's appearance without commenting on its success. Several guests who understood the translation covered smiles. Park's expression froze. For just a moment, Maya saw rage flash across his face, at being outmaneuvered by an 8-year-old, at having his power diminished in front of witnesses. Then his mask returned, and he moved on, but the damage was done. Hana had just demonstrated that she wasn't weak. She was dangerous in ways Park hadn't anticipated. The dinner proceeded with excruciating formality. Courses were served with precision, conversations happened in multiple languages and levels of meaning, alliances were tested and reformed across the tables. And through it all, Hana sat beside her father, engaging when engaged with, comfortable in her silence when not. Maya watched the guests watching Hana, saw their assessments shift from pity to curiosity to, in some cases, something like respect. Here was a child who existed in a world designed to exclude her and refused to apologize for it, who met the most dangerous people in Seoul with perfect composure, who made her deafness seem less like a disability and more like a choice to ignore people who didn't deserve her attention. It was working. Against all odds, Maya's gamble was actually working. Then Park Jin-woo stood to make a toast, and everything went wrong. To our host, he said, raising his glass, his voice carrying across the sudden silence. Seo Joon-ho has built an empire on strength, on never showing weakness, on understanding that in our world, sentiment is suicide. He paused, let the words sink in. So I'm curious about this new direction. This openness about family matters. Tell me, Seo, is this strength? Or is this the beginning of the end? The question was a blade aimed at Joon-ho's throat. Every person in the room understood that Park was forcing a choice. Defend the daughter and look weak, or defend the empire and reject her. There was no good answer, which was exactly the point. Joon-ho stood slowly. Maya saw his hands twitch, wanting to sign to Hana, wanting to reassure her, but knowing that showing that concern in this moment would be seen as capitulation. Before he could speak, Hana stood. The movement was so unexpected that it silenced the room completely. An 8-year-old girl standing to address a table full of crime lords should have been absurd. Instead, it was riveting. Hana signed, her movements large and deliberate, and Maya translated. You think my father is weak because he loves me. You think my deafness makes us vulnerable. But I've been watching all of you tonight. Her hands moved with increasing confidence. And I've seen something you haven't. My father knows who he can trust and who he can't, because he's been watching the same things I watch. How you look at people when you think they're not paying attention, who you really respect, and who you just fear. The alliances you're building in whispers while pretending to be loyal. The temperature in the room plummeted. Hana was calling out behavior that everyone knew happened, but nobody acknowledged. She was breaking every unspoken rule. You're all so focused on sound, Hana continued, her signs fierce and beautiful, that you've forgotten how much people say without words. My father learned my language because he wanted to understand me. But what he actually learned was how to see what people are really saying instead of just hearing what they want him to hear. You think that makes him weak? I think it makes him the most dangerous person in this room. Maya's hands trembled as she translated the last words. This wasn't what they'd rehearsed. This was Hana going completely off script, taking the vulnerability meant to humanize her father and weaponizing it instead. Park Jin-woo's face had gone very still. Is that a threat? It's an observation, Maya translated as Hana signed. You asked if this is strength or weakness. I'm telling you, it's strength you don't recognize because you've never had to learn a different language. You've never had to see the world through someone else's eyes. My father has. And now he understands things you don't. That's not weakness. That's evolution. The silence that followed was absolute. Then, impossibly, someone started clapping. A man Maya recognized as one of Joon-ho's oldest allies, someone whose opinion carried weight. Others joined, not everyone, but enough. A scattered applause that sounded like approval, or perhaps just relief that someone had finally said the quiet part loud. Park Jin-woo remained standing, his glass still raised, but the moment had slipped away from him. He'd meant to humiliate Joon-ho, and instead, Joon-ho's daughter had just implied he was too unobservant to recognize actual power when it stood in front of him. He sat down without completing the toast. The ultimate concession. Joon-ho placed a hand on Hana's shoulder, squeezed gently. When he signed, his movements were visible to everyone. "You are the bravest person I know." The dinner continued, but the balance had shifted. Park Jin-woo had come to expose Hana as Joon-ho's weakness, and instead had been outmaneuvered by the child herself. His power play had backfired spectacularly, and everyone in the room knew it. But Maya saw something others missed: Park's rage. The way his hands gripped his chopsticks like weapons. The way his jaw clenched so tight she could see the muscle jumping. He'd been humiliated, and men like Park didn't forgive humiliation. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. After the guests departed, after the staff cleaned up, after the estate finally fell silent, Maya found Hana and Joon-ho in the girls' room. Father and daughter were sitting on the floor, surrounded by the art Hana had created over the past weeks, all those dark, painful drawings documenting her isolation. But tonight, Hana was making something new. Bright colors, bold strokes, an image of herself standing tall while shadowy figures watched from the margins. "She wants to title it Learning to Roar in Silence," Joon-ho said when he noticed Maya. "I told her it was perfect." Maya sat beside them, feeling the exhaustion of the evening settling into her bones. "You took a huge risk tonight," she said to Hana. "Going off script like that. You could have made things worse." Hana's hands moved, "I know. But I was tired of being afraid. Tired of letting other people decide what I'm capable of. You taught me that my deafness doesn't make me less. Tonight, I taught them the same thing. And you," Maya turned to Joon-ho. "You let her. You didn't try to protect her from it or control what she said. That took extraordinary courage. Or extraordinary faith," Joon-ho replied quietly. "In her. In you. In the idea that maybe vulnerability isn't the same as weakness." He paused. "I'm still not entirely convinced, but I'm willing to find out." "Park Jin-woo is going to retaliate," Maya said. "You know that." "Yes. And you're not going to hide Hana away again." "No. Even if it costs you everything." Joon-ho looked at his daughter, really looked at her, with an expression that held years of regret and hope and fierce determination. "I've already lost too much time hiding her. I won't lose more trying to keep her safe from a life she deserves to live. Whatever comes next, we face it together. All of us." He included Maya in that statement, and she felt the weight of it. She was no longer the hired help. She was family, with all the danger and responsibility that entailed. Julian's face flashed through her mind, her beautiful boy, lost because she'd trusted the wrong people, because she'd believed systems were infallible. She'd spent 3 years running from that grief, convinced that caring again would destroy her. But sitting here with Hana and Joon-ho, Maya understood what she'd been missing. Healing didn't mean forgetting Julian. It meant honoring him by showing up for other children who needed her, by choosing connection despite the risk, by refusing to let fear make her small. "Together," Maya agreed. "Whatever comes, we face it together." Outside, Seoul glittered in the darkness. Somewhere in that sprawling city, Park Jin-woo was planning his next move, calculating how to destroy the family that had humiliated him. Threats were gathering, danger was imminent, and Maya had no illusions that the path forward would be anything but treacherous. But in this room, a broken family had become whole. A girl who'd been taught she was shameful had learned she was powerful. A man who'd built an empire on fear had discovered that love was stronger. And a woman who'd run from grief had finally stopped running. Sometimes salvation doesn't look like victory. Sometimes it looks like a small girl painting herself as a warrior, a father learning to apologize, a stranger choosing to stay when leaving would be safer. Sometimes the most revolutionary thing you can do is simply refuse to be ashamed, refuse to hide, refuse to let the world make you smaller than you are. The war wasn't over. It might never be over. But they would fight it together, and that made all the difference. Because love, real love, the kind that chooses someone every single day despite the cost, is its own kind of armor. And Hana had just taught a room full of criminals that underestimating someone because they're different is the deadliest mistake you can make. Tomorrow would bring new threats, new challenges, new battles. But tonight, they'd won something more important than any fight. They'd won each other. And in this brutal, beautiful world, sometimes that's the only victory that actually matters.